Nice. Good evening, everyone. This is the Joint Committees on Rules and Ordinances and Public Works. The two chairs of those committees, Councilor Anthony Donato and Councilor Vince Petrelli, have graciously allowed me to step in and present this evening on an update to some of the work we've been doing on the tree program. I guess as a way of background to some of the folks at home, what these joint committees have been doing for the last 2 years is discussing ways to strengthen protections for trees. And a lot of great things have come out of the last couple of meetings. And the goal, I think, from the beginning, at least in my mind, was always to develop some sort of process in which the council would always be over a duration, a fixed period of time. We'd always be looking at updating our existing tree inventories and discussing tree-related issues, whether that's plantings, prunings, replacements, health of trees, etc., you name it. So I think what was put together by Chris Hayward, who's our tree warden, with some assistance from me, mostly just me badgering Chris, was this policy that I want to present to the committee. And if the committee is okay with it, I think this policy will serve as the way forward. And so we would be able to end this particular referral, and this process would serve as how we move forward. And I think it's a couple other updates we want to give, but if that's okay with everyone, I was just hoping to kind of run through this first, get everyone's reaction, and then go from there. Okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So I guess the long story short is the way I've presented this to Trees for Watertown, to DPW. Oh, sorry. Is the first sheet is it's
Did you? Okay.
yeah, sorry. The first sheet's titled Watertown's Tree Program Annual Long-Term Objectives. So I guess the long story short is the way I've always looked at this and visualized it is a comparable process, and how I've explained it to other folks is a process that's similar to the road reconstruction program. And it's basically once a year, Public Works has a meeting that says, here are the streets, here's where we're at as a community in terms of our ranking of streets, these are the streets we're going to be doing, here's the health of the streets, and we talk about the streets in a very holistic view and how we're going to move forward with them. It's basically taking that and doing that for tree-related issues. So this policy spells it out. And there's a very short header that just talks about, making tree planting and pruning services available for residents, and these policies and aspirational goals that we have moving forward. So the first piece is an annual update, as I mentioned. So that'd be from the Forestry Division, given to the Committee on Public Works. In my mind, that's happening in the January or February timeframe. That way we can get a nice prior calendar year viewing for the rest of the numbers that we'll be discussing. Also, if there's snow on the ground, it might be a little bit harder to be planting and doing other things. So hopefully that's a time where the Forestry Division isn't as burdened. So during that meeting, what would happen, they would come forward and they'd present on this first topic, which is new tree plantings. And I did note in here that there's about, we're planting about 100 or something trees a year, right? 160. So what we said was, there's an increased budget. We're planting 160 now. There's a lot happening. There's a lot of movement. There's a lot of momentum behind private entities like Trees for Watertown, Teams for Trees that are going to be moving these initiatives forward. We should set a goal of maintaining that and increasing that every single year over the next 10-year period. So try to think about this a little over a long-term period. So the goal would be to plant over 2,500 trees over the next 10 years, at least 250 trees each year, and have that be a combination of Watertown planting the trees like we always do, and private groups and individuals doing the same. And so having that data all together so we can see what's happening and progressing in Watertown in terms of tree plantings. It'd be the same thing in terms of tracking those new plantings and their effect on canopy levels. And all these will be part of data sets that the Forestry Division is going to be keeping. So we can say, all right, calendar year 2019, we planted 4 million trees, and they were planted in these locations. So we have this much more canopy. And the next year we say, okay, after the 4 million, we did another 8 million. We can tabulate and we can track and we can see how our progress is. Nothing in this policy is set in stone. I'm not asking the council to set it in stone. So if next year we plant, let's say something crazy happens, the cost of planting a tree goes from whatever it is today, call it 5,000.
Per tree is 500.
500, say it goes from $500 to $5,000. Market goes absolutely crazy. We have to reevaluate. So these numbers aren't set in stone, and that's going to be something we can bring up at the meeting. We can say, hey, the number's 10 times now. You either need to give me more money to plant trees, or the number's going to go from 250 to 50, something like that. So just having that conversation. The health of those trees is also going to be something that's commented on. Pruning, tracking the pruning, and I guess as part of this would be requests. So the two attachments after this initial policy overview is talking about how a resident goes about replacing or requesting a new or existing tree, and those policies and how many come in, how many are granted, how many are not. Those will all be things that are brought up during this annual update as well. And then the last provision there is just kind of miscellaneous. What else is happening in the tree world? What are the new technologies that are out? How will those new technologies affect what we're trying to do in Watertown? I guess all related miscellaneous issues, and we're going to talk about a couple tonight. So this is the goal, and so hopefully the first trial run of this would be this January or February. Public Works would meet, just like we do with road reconstruction, and we'd have all this information, the first test run. That's kind of it. So open it up to questions on the policy, and then we can kind of go from there. I feel like I'm talking really loud. Am I talking really loud right now? Okay. All right. Sorry, yeah.
I guess the only question I have is how difficult do we think it's going to be to track trees planted by outside of the forestry division?
Yeah, it's going to be a little difficult. One of the things that does happen is, not so much right now for me, and every day is a new day for me in this position since I've been back. Somebody's trying to get it. So every day is something different. But one of the things that I'm looking forward to in working with the town engineer is when a development comes in, say, Arsenal Yards or Elon or Gables or whatever, they present a landscape plan, there's a planting schedule, with plants. Now, it's not necessarily at this time my job to monitor what those plants are and how successful they are and whatever, but at least I can get a list of the trees that are gonna be planted on that project. And I work with the landscape architect a little bit. Again, right now, that's not my responsibility, but going forward, that may be, depending on how the town wants to go, what direction. It sounds like kind of seeing a direction here. So we'll have at least that planning schedule, so we can add that to our number of trees being planted within the boundary of Watertown anyway. So we'll have that. The success of those trees, though, doesn't really necessarily fall on me at this time, but at least we know what's going in.
So now, and I don't know if you know the answer to this question, but before a certificate of occupancy is issued, is one of the inspection items to make sure that the trees listed on the planting schedule are actually there?
If it is, I don't know who's doing the inspection.
Okay, just because that, I guess that could be, if there's no follow-up, we don't know if what they proposed is actually what ends up being there in practice.
In my time here as conservation agent, that was something that I was responsible for doing within jurisdictional boundaries. But now that it's town-wide and my position is town-wide, I really haven't been called to do that.
Okay.
That would be a large amount of extra work on top of what I'm doing right now. So something to think about.
Yeah, sorry, Tony.
Well, to follow up on that, I remember the controversy over the trees that were planted around CVS. And I do remember you used to be either present or would be checking out whether they were planted correctly.
So, not to go back too far into my history here, but in that particular case, it was brought to my attention after the fact that the tree warden was written into a zoning special permit, and then it was brought to my attention. What I was really there for at first was that development was required to plant a street tree. And then all of a sudden the language went in there that, and the tree warden will also monitor the health of the trees within the parking lot area.
Right.
And that was the first time that had been asked.
Oh, so you don't, when at 65, didn't you have some row at 65 Grove Street too, around the tree planting? No? Okay.
Denny.
And I just want to clarify that any project with a special permit is required to submit a landscaping plan that calls out the specific trees and where they're planted. And that becomes one of the control documents that's recorded on the deed. So that is in perpetuity. So we have had developers that have done a building, planted the trees, and then 2 years later, they were dead. And as part of the zoning enforcement, because it's a condition of the special permit, they had to replace those trees as, or they would be in violation of their special permit. And so it's like any other condition of a special permit, that is, the plantings are required. And if they want to change it or remove that tree or put a different kind of tree, they need to go back and get a modification of the drawings from the ZBA. So we have that as a powerful tool for new developments. I think the plan is now with the tree warden and the DPW and our hiring of the environmental planner, that the environmental planner would be taking over some of those responsibilities as part of the planning department, but we don't have an environmental planner yet, so. But that's coming, and certainly the code enforcement officer and the zoning enforcement officer can take a role in enforcing, if they're required in the parking lot to plant trees, and then they decide, 3 years later to cut down those trees, that becomes a zoning enforcement issue, and they can be brought back to the ZBA for a show cause hearing.
But I guess there's still the issue of monitoring, because unless we know the tree was removed, or, if a resident reports it, or a zoning enforcement officer just happens to have the plan, there's, I guess that's, but to your point, I guess maybe it makes sense when the environmental planning
Yeah. And it's like,
description is finalized, there's some sort of,
and like everything else with the code enforcement, it's like, people doing work without permits,
Yeah.
some of it, you rely on citizens, or counselors saying, hey, what's going on over there?
Bless you.
So, but I think we have that as a tool, and, and it's just a question of how we're gonna do it. And of course, people so this planting, we can only look at plans that go through the special permit process. If I want to plant 2 new trees, I planted 2 new trees in my house. That's not gonna show up on the list, because I'm not reporting it to anybody, so.
Yeah, sorry, Lisa.
Well, so on that, to Anthony's point, I thought the description was finalized, and I don't remember enforcement being part of the environmental planner. So part of my concern, the way the long-term objectives read here, we don't really distinguish between private versus public. We kind of, we do, but it says that, if we don't meet the goals, then non-municipal organizations will, this one sentence doesn't make sense actually, but kind of take up the slack, or depending on budget. And so since we don't have a private tree ordinance, these are great goals, but I don't understand really how we would have the tree warden monitor private trees and have this be rolled into our agrees for goals for planting too. And one of my concerns is there's so many areas in Watertown that don't have the planting strips or curbing. And I was hoping we'd hear some ideas we were talking about protection of trees. And so residents who are already suffering from not having curbs or planting strips aren't going to be identified to get trees either. And so that, in my mind, there's somewhat of an equity issue of how we're increasing the canopy and who's going to benefit from that. I think it's fine that, Chris has been very generous saying, I'll help you try to find a private space on your property if we can't fit a public tree. But then it seems like the responsibility is then with that homeowner, not for why we would use tax dollars to have the tree warden then ensure the health and pruning and of that tree. I don't think we legally can do that, can we, without anything in place for private trees?
I guess I'm gonna try to take that one at a time. The first piece is what Anthony asked, which is basically Chris can do his best job he can to track the private trees. That's all we can do. And there's a couple of different mechanisms through zoning in which we have the landscape plans, and those can be added in this way. I think there's a strong push from private groups in Watertown to have residents plant trees, and us moving through that process and Chris working with those groups. I think that's how we're gonna build that up. But as it relates to street trees and the curbing issue, that's not.
Well, that was just on the agenda as was posted for protection of trees, so, and I'm just reading through this now, so we don't have anything that addresses that. And if we're to really increase across town the number of trees, obviously we can do that just because we've lost so many trees where there already was one, and, but
So I guess
that's a
I guess-
missing
I guess part of the
piece of it.
evolution becomes that when we go. This is probably something that I went on a tangent about because that sounds like something I would do. The referral was broad when it was first given. It didn't really have a direction. So we asked during that first meeting, what do folks really want to see here? How do we make Watertown more tree friendly? And so the referral was, how can we strengthen rules for the protection of trees? And the issue became, we need more trees. We need, better pruning techniques. We need ways to track the health of the trees and a whole bunch of these other issues. And the question became, well, how do we do that? What's the process by which we can start addressing these issues? And this is that process. And so what came out of the referral was we need to address certain issues. And how do we address those issues? We need to have a process in place and so we can be discussing these issues and developing policies as they come up. So this is part of it. Obviously the budget priority guideline was a part of it, and little things that have happened since then. But the protection, I guess, in thinking of the term literally, is not what was really the intent of the referral.
Well, I agree that it said regulations to strengthen the protection of trees.
Yeah.
And as you noted, when we first started this, it was, we need the data. So we were working with Teams for Tree and, whether we use the existing database or there's new software developed, it was getting the data, number one. So
Yeah, I guess the reason I mentioned that is because I would take exception to categorizing this policy is not to protect trees. It's not physically to protect trees. When I have Chris out there, with on his head in a swivel, protecting and
I'm talking about
diving
the
in front of
infrastructure,
yeah.
protecting trees, yeah.
Yeah, so this is more exactly. It's a plan for, I guess, instead of protection, it's probably better to say the overall growth and health and promotion of. That's what we meant by protection. Yeah. Sorry. We'll go to Tony, and then if there's no more questions, we'll open it up.
So I'd like a couple of questions about this goal again. Focus on that for a while. You say you plant 160 trees. The town plants 160 trees about.
That's what I had been doing, before I came back into this role. Yeah.
Okay, and where are those trees usually planted? Where do you? Is that a combination of the town deciding we need more trees in this canopy, or is that only residents asking for trees?
It's pretty much request.
So the town has no specific approach yet to.
No, I do, but
Well, I'm not trying to say you don't. I'm just trying to be clear that the trees that were planted were mostly requests.
mostly request. I'd say about
Following
75%
this sort of
request.
request of the way to request a tree, right? So, have you, or has the town developed a policy around looking at what areas need more trees and taking it upon an active role in suggesting where trees should be planted?
So I play an active role daily about where trees should go. It really is determined by if that resident wants a tree or not.
So we don't plant trees as part of our own, we're responding to requests. We don't do tree planting by our own decision.
We do in parks, we do in public land, and occasionally I'll remove a tree, there's an absentee landlord, renters don't really care, I'm just gonna plant a tree. So I'm just saying that it's more request, but I still have a budget that I have to spend, so I do look for other locations to plant.
So, but the goal of 100 and 250 trees in a year, and I know that it was just a aspirational goal. If you do 160 now, we're talking not another 90 trees, so it is seeming if we're not going to go out and say, you know, this part of town needs a bigger canopy of trees, because it doesn't have as many trees, and we've sort of used up whatever public land we could plant them on, though then it seems to me that the only way you're going to get more trees is to get more individuals who want a tree on their that thing between the
Planting
sidewalk,
strip.
on their planting strip, or take advantage of this back of sidewalk program. So how do we foresee bringing in another 90 requests?
Sorry, Chris, if I could jump in, I'm gonna go somewhere a little different actually, I think where you would go, but I am under the impression, and I don't wanna put words in anyone's mouth if Chiefs of Watertown wants to speak a little bit about this, but I'm under the impression that the Teens for Trees program might have an idea in their minds about areas of town that would like plantings, and a future initiative of theirs might be to go to those locations and work and talk to the residents and say, hey, here's the policy, you want a tree? And so we could see, let's say, Pine Street in the West End, not enough trees. It wouldn't shock me if we saw, Teens for Trees going around door to door on Pine Street saying, do you want a tree? Fill out this form and we're gonna put in the request for you, and absolutely hammering Chris with requests for the areas that they've identified as lacking canopy. In my mind, that's gonna happen, but.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
it might be a good goal for them, I don't know. if
Sorry, I don't want to
trees
speak
for
for,
Watertown
yeah, I don't want to speak
side
for,
that, or
but
whether
sorry,
the Teens for Trees are
should we
gonna
let Libby,
what you're
Yeah.
basically building this around, you're building this around an outreach project,
Yes.
pushing a project that is being done by a nonprofit and not by the town.
yes, yeah.
But also taking into account those trees planted on private developments.
Oh, of course, yes, absolutely, and those are gonna be part of it as well. Sorry, and Libby, I've been ignoring you forever, sorry. I think we're good for the committee, yes.
So just a little reality check here. The Teens for Trees program is a fantastic program. It's been absolutely splendid in bringing people's focus to how much we need trees. Providing the data and also just having these young folks out on the street interacting with trees and interacting with neighbors about trees has just been a wonderful organic way to introduce people to the idea of how good trees are for your neighborhood. But this is a 6-week program, 120 hours basically from each kid. It's not very long. These teams are, in many cases, just getting introduced to the concept themselves of trees. This is not a finely tuned core. What we hope this year is that, I was actually just talking with the program director today, what we're hoping this year is that in going out and doing the survey, they're going to be interacting with people and collecting a database of people who seem interested in particular neighborhoods. Like basically, if you get one person who's interested in a neighborhood, if it's the neighborhood where people are actually talking to their neighbors, then you've actually got a seed that can then expand. And maybe next year,
No pun intended, yeah.
yeah, for instance, you'll hear a lot of that. But we are not assuming that at the end of this 6 weeks, we're going to have a neighborhood where, I mean, even in the best case, a neighborhood tree planting is maybe going to be 6 trees, 8 trees, not 90 by any means. I also want to say, we badly need our tree canopy, and we're losing tree canopy much faster than we're replanting. So when we lose our existing big trees, you have to plant many small trees. It's going to take decades for any one of those trees to replace the canopy that's lost. In Cambridge, I think I've already shared with you once or twice, they talk about needing to plant something like 5,000 trees 10 years. The numbers, I mean, I don't think we should assume we're in better shape than Cambridge in terms of how fast we're looking at tree canopy. We really need to be thinking about planting many more than 250 trees a year. We really need to, if we want to keep all of those really important services that our urban forest supplies to our neighborhoods and our city healthy and growing, we need to plant many more trees than 250 a year. And ideally, we'll be planting, ideally the town itself would be committed to planting 250 a year. It's really important that we protect. I mean, the protection really is important. We do need to try to protect to the best extent that we can the existing healthy, mature trees that are out there now, because they are doing a huge amount. A big tree has exponentially more than it does for us, both in terms of sucking up stormwater and also just in terms of all those millions of leaves, in terms of cooling the direct environment and contributing to the overall urban forest ecology. When you lose a big tree in Watertown, you lose a lot. And it still just kills me that we lost 50 significant trees all at once over on Pleasant Street. That was such a blow to that neighborhood. I would love it if we as a town could establish some kind of a policy going forward that can never happen again, unless major recompense is made, because that was a huge blow to that neighborhood over on Waltham Street, for instance. So I guess my basic message here is, I really love this policy that you put together, but we need to think much more seriously about how we're going to maintain the current urban forest canopy that we have, and it's going to take a lot more than 2,500 trees over 10 years to do that.
I think that's a really good point, and I think the number that's there is just to kind of represent the start. And like I said, if there's a situation where you have 500 requests and we plant this 500 planted, we can change that number, and then we could be in a situation. I mean, depending on how this all goes, in 2 years, Chris is saying, hey guys, I have so many requests here, and you haven't given me the budget for it, and then it becomes on us to actually provide that. So we just don't know how it's going to go. So I guess this is kind of a starting, but that's why it's not concrete. Like I'd be more than happy to, yeah. I could see it changing. Yeah, sorry, Dave.
So I have 2 points. One, kind of on that very specific point, we already had a pilot project on Edenfield Ave. It did not go as originally planned. A lot of those neighbors shut their doors and said, do not, underscored not, bold, capital letters, put a tree in front of my house, period. So we know that there are folks who are not interested in having a tree in front of their house.
Absolutely.
On the public land that's there. Will they put it on their private land? I don't know the answer to that. But I think that's a limiting factor. So 250 to me sounds like a fairly reasonable 50% increase in what we are doing today. As a starting goal. I don't disagree, Libby, that we definitely might need more than 250 trees a year, but I don't also know how we would get there.
It's hearts and minds. We really have to work on public education. That's the only way we're going to get there. And that's one of the wonderful things that the Teach for Trees program does is, I think when somebody interacts with a teenager who expresses their view, the communication works a whole lot better than when they're interacting with an adult that they perceive, rightly or wrongly, as having some agenda that may impose on their property rights or whatever.
I think it's a really good point. The public education piece can be big. So we'll go back to Lisa then Tony.
Oh, that's okay. So nobody.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Michelle. Then back to David. Yeah.
I didn't raise yet. So 250, great, most people. But I don't understand why, like Tony said, there's not more detail as to like where the real need is location-wise. It'd be nice to have that as part of a plan and not just a number, but you need to know like the where and where it's most needed. And it's saying that any expected difference between that and what is actually done by the town will be met by local organizations. Like how large can that number be that a local organization is supposed to supplement what the town hasn't been able to take care of.
If I may just mention on that point, so that's more in there to just to really highlight that this is this is a town effort, not just a forestry division effort. So, but that it would be everything. So it'd be, if I snuck onto Vinny's property and planted a tree, like that would be an example of one tree planted. Or if a developer comes in and says, hey, we're gonna, we're doing this and we're gonna plant 100 trees. It's really just an all-encompassing number. So I just really wanted to to emphasize that it wasn't just a forestry division thing. This is going to be a town-wide initiative, and that so that number isn't just going to be like at the end of it, we shouldn't be taking complete credit for it. We can't let's say it's wildly successful, we get tons of trees, we can't just pat ourselves in the back and say, hey, this is a town effort. Like everyone was involved in getting these numbers together.
And is there any possibility of coming up with a plan of location where the greatest necessity is to say, okay, this is where we need to make our focus? And so far, there doesn't seem to be focus.
No, it's not focused area only because it's a lot more challenging with the point that David brought up about if someone doesn't want it. We could say, hey, whatever street doesn't have any trees, and you go up that street and no one wants them. So that's the challenge right now that we haven't started addressing, but that's why it's not in here.
But I also think that,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
think we're, say, come January or February of 2020, when we have this first annual update,
Yeah.
I think that, I'm sure, as Chris travels around town and reviews requests, he's gonna know
Have an
and be able
idea
to
of-
kind of
yeah.
synthesize that, and we'll build off that going forward. And I would imagine, if not year one, but in future years, part of the presentation might be, these are the areas in town that we should make a push for.
True. Sorry, Michelle. Yes.
So I understand that's expected that, there's gonna be people, don't put anything in front of my house. But first, before you even find that out, you need to go and focus on that area and find that out. So you need to say, okay, well, here's where they're needed the most, let's go and focus there the most, and then see, is there demand, are people turning us down? But, because I wouldn't like to, go to the places where not that there's any areas that are fine in Watertown, but, some places are more demand that need more than others. So there should be some focus on those areas first. And if people say no, you move on to the next. But, why would you go and focus on areas that are better off than others, before focusing on those areas that are in dire need?
Nice. Yeah.
I also think we kind of have a capacity issue, one
Oh, absolutely.
between, Chris has limited resources, whether it's time or staff. It's gonna be hard from the get-go to be
Yeah.
knocking on
Oh, yeah.
doors and.
That's what I think the public education piece
Sure,
is going to come
sure.
in big. I think Olivia's talking
And-
about.
and
Yeah.
The teams are probably gonna be doing some of that in the remainder of this 6-week period. But it won't be, tree stormtroopers getting out there.
Yeah.
And they're new every year. It's a new
Right.
set of kids every
Yeah.
year, so
And
it's
they're
not
very
like-
young kids.
Yeah.
They grow a lot during the program, but a lot of the program is their growth and not so
Yeah.
much the impact.
Maybe we could do a competition amongst the counselors. Whichever ones of us can get the most folks to register trees.
There you go.
That's true. Yep. That's a good one. Yep. We can put Vegas odds on that. That'd be great. That'd be a nice competition that'd be a nice bonding experience. That'd be nice overall. Yeah. Sorry, Caroline, did you have something? Okay, good, okay. Oh, okay. Okay, we'll go back to, sorry, David, then we'll go back to the committee.
So I just wanted to mention, also, kind of going back to the enforcement, really in development space, lots of times trees are part of the stormwater management plan, which falls to the DPW to supervise and enforce. So we have some additional enforcement capabilities there. I think it's probably Matt, Kevin, though, not so much you, perhaps. But there is, so 65 Grove Street was kind of prompted that for me, because all the trees that are on that property, part of the stormwater management plan for that property, and if they fail, Matt can write them up, essentially.
Yeah.
So I just want to kind of remind people that that's already in place.
But it really is so important. Getting back to CVS, one of the really tragic things that happened with CVS is 2 big, beautiful honey locusts on Mount Auburn Street are both dying because of the abuse they suffered during that construction project. They really needed supervision, protection during public shade trees during developments. Hopefully now that we have a full-time tree warden, we'll be able to achieve better than we have in the past, but it's gotta happen, otherwise we'll see trees just destroyed like those two honey locusts are on their way out. They really shouldn't be.
All right, we'll go Lisa then Tony. Yeah.
So again, part of my concern is enforcement, and I guess this, is a little bit of a bigger question in terms of organization of the town and the personnel and who's doing what, because as we grow, I see a little too many different pockets of, and it needs to be coordinated, whether it's stormwater or it's a permit or now it's a private tree, it's a public tree, and so I have some concern about that in trying to track the health of the trees and who's really doing what and being clear about that. And that's probably a discussion even more with the town manager perhaps and the department heads. But I guess a big concern of mine is again that there's too much, in my opinion, just giving over of our public space. And if in terms of tree-lined streets, pretty tree-lined streets and equity across town, if we're just gonna say, oh, well, they don't want a tree there, so we're not gonna plant it. Well, that's, we don't say, oh, well, you wanna park there, you can park or you can't park, and we just give away the space. And I know that's a difficult thing, but given kind of the history and how things are, a lot of inconsistencies around town, who has planting strips or not, and who's used to parking on the sidewalk or not. And to David's point, I feel like if we don't have a clear policy that yes, there are wires here, but these smaller tree species can go, and this is town property, and we're able to help the homeowner. Because again, I feel like we send double messages. We say, well, you get to decide whether you have a tree or not, but you're not allowed to prune that tree, but we expect you to water the tree. And it's really confusing for the homeowner. And, well, I want this certain kind of tree. Well, you're saying whether I can have a tree, why can't I have this kind of tree? And I think that puts the tree warden, I would think, in a very difficult position. And this is a lot I'm hearing that that we're looking at tonight is for one person, and I still have concern over, I don't know if you can clarify, this sentence doesn't make sense under tracking of new tree plantings and the effect on town canopy levels, but and I appreciate the goal. I'm all for public, private, town-wide, of course, but I don't think that we're gonna reach our goal of pretty tree-lined streets when we don't have a clear vision of the infrastructure and what the town controls. If this is public infrastructure, here's a sidewalk, here's the curb, here's the planting strip. I certainly understand there's not always room for a planting strip, but we really aren't gonna make our goals if we don't include that big picture in my mind. I don't see how, and we're definitely not gonna be where we need to be. I agree with Libby and others who's saying okay, in one hand, 250 maybe is realistic because it's a small number. On the other hand, we're not gonna be where we need to be because this is way too small of a goal, really. I think when the data comes back and shows all the canopy that's lost, and there are, some cities will even regulate private trees. I'm not suggesting that on their own lot, depending on their lot size, but there are, in my own neighborhood, easily lost a dozen trees just in the last season on private lands. And I also think visually, so we're gonna have trees here, maybe if there's people that don't have front yards or a sidewalk. Other places we're gonna have it in the planting strip, which is great because people are used to that division between the cars and sidewalk. So I love, you know, a lot of things that you're saying and can appreciate the direction you're going, but I have real concerns that we're not really taking control of our public space.
If, I guess, the only thing I'd say in response is, if you wanna make a referral to Public Works to consider the matter of not letting the resident who lives at a plot of land control whether or not a tree is planted outside of their house, please feel free to make that referral. That's not what we're doing tonight, or
Well, no, that's in
The
here,
job of
as
this.
far as like how you request to reach, and we have
whether or not a tree is
guidelines
planted
that
in
within 30 days, if it's a public space, they'll come out and see, but we don't say if it's that needs to be cleaned up a little bit, because there's nothing in here about if it's a private tree.
what the issue you brought up was about having a resident have the ability to say yes or no to the town planting trees outside their house.
Right, there's two things, right?
Yeah, right now the policy is if the resident says, no, we don't want a tree, then we don't plant a tree. If you want to change that policy, I'd recommend making that a referral to committee.
I don't know that's actual policy, I think it's just practice.
Sure, whatever you want to call it. But either
No,
way,
there's a
if you
difference
want to change the
between how a
practice,
department
I'd recommend
runs
you
versus
refer it. That's
council
not what
policy.
we're addressing tonight. But good luck. This is the committee that.
No, this is how we're addressing, we're setting
is
out
the-
goals and objectives for how, long and short term, of how we're gonna increase our canopy.
You're asking us to make a decision on whether or not there's going to be a policy or practice change in how we plant trees outside someone's house. That's
Yeah,
not what we're
that's,
doing.
right, that's what we have right here,
Yeah,
how
we're not
you
addressing
request
that
a tree and
specific
how we're
piece
planting
tonight.
it.
Again, I'd recommend you refer that to committee if you want to move forward with that. So we'll go with Tony, then Vinny, then back out. Sorry, which one?
Can I just go back to the planting that you do now? So, if I have a piece of public land in front of my house on my strip, and I want a tree, I make that request to you. And how much does that cost me?
Ultimately, nothing.
You
I ask for a small donation.
Yeah.
That money goes into, you know, if we would like go to a park and cable a tree, for instance, do some pruning on, library trees where we have to climb, so just use it. But if you don't pay me anything, it's fine.
Okay, and so if I want a tree 20 feet in from the sidewalk on this, how much does that cost me?
I asked for that $95 a little more adamantly, because I know that if you're gonna pay, you might wanna take care of it.
And so the $500 is a cost that you have, you use a vendor to plant, right? You
Yes.
don't plant, right? You use a vendor to plant, and that's the going rate with a vendor to plant a tree on a strip.
That was this year's contracted rate, yes.
On a strip,
Yeah.
or in this, so that the only land that we have outside, as you say, parks, the only land that's public outside of parks are the planting strips. Right. So what stops us from just going to a neighborhood that doesn't have a canopy and saying we're gonna just put a few trees on this strip? Is it only because of the neighbors?
Just history that if I do that, the trees end up dying.
Because no one takes care of them?
No, because they're vandalized.
Oh, by people who don't want the tree, is that the idea? They don't want the tree, so they find a way to get rid of it.
The stories I can give you with the imagination of people and vandalism is unbelievable.
So if we eliminate that, where we take an initiative to plant on our public property, which is the town's property, and if we're not gonna take the initiative to plant on that, then we are just sort of back to the square one about urging folks to go for a tree. And finding an incentive to make it easy for them to do that. Now, besides them being responsible for pruning it, or maybe you would prune it, but for watering it and caring for it, there's not much of an incentive that we can do for them, is that right? Is there any other thing we can do to make them want to have a tree in front of their, even not in front, I keep saying in front, but on their strip? Is there anything else that can,
Basically public education.
that's it?
Educating an individual to understand the benefits of the tree.
Yeah.
You know, the things I hear automatically are, I lose my parking space. I get it, I understand. Parking is tight in metro communities, especially Watertown.
Right.
The next is, who's gonna get up there and clean my gutters? I don't, trees are messy. The next one is, I don't want any roots in my sewer pipe, I don't want any roots, around my utilities, kicking up my my driveway making a mess in my yard. I have my yard manicured. I don't want any of your mess. These are the things that I hear all the time.
And these are the things that you can respond, that are answerable?
Sure, I continue to respond with, well, the benefits outweigh, a beat up driveway.
Uh-huh.
There's some cultural mindsets there. My driveway has to be 90 degrees and perfectly flat, and, I can eat my dinner off of it.
Right.
There's a root going through it, God help you.
Right, okay, so before, I know you want to talk, Libby, I just want to come back to the question of the canopy and wonder if there's a way to put into this policy, which is there a way to add something about existing canopies, that one of the things that we would like to track and is that there be a presentation of the existing canopies and identification of areas that are have fewer trees, so that under tracking of new plantings and the effect on canopies, maybe canopy levels, that we include something there that says that the division will present annually a I don't know how to say it, but a canopy program or a canopy display that shows where the trees are in most need and whether any of the new planting took place in those canopies.
That, if you remember, that was done, not even.
Yes, I have that
Yeah,
from, so we just need to,
So there's a protocol for that, which could be continued, not sure necessarily by Teams for Trees, but it's a fairly simple program, working from satellite images.
Right.
Up-to-date satellite images.
so I'm just saying that maybe we could add it as a
Yeah,
section.
I think that's a good idea. In the canopy levels, we can add language that says that the topic of the existing canopy level and the identification of locations where canopy is lacking would be part of that presentation. I think that's fair.
So say that again?
Where we'd add the status of existing canopy levels and identify locations where canopy is lacking.
Thank you, that's a great idea.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I
I guess, yeah.
You talked about incentives. I think it's Eugene, Oregon, that actually, given the value of shade trees, in terms of stormwater management, I think in Eugene, that gives
Existing
residents
canopy. Oh, I dropped language.
on their, water
Taxes
bill,
on their water bill.
if they have a big tree, or if they plant
I don't think we have the legal authority to do that.
but it's, just to let you know that that other cities have come up with incentives that have a monetary value.
I don't think existing mass law allows that. Yeah. Yes, David. Sorry. Vinny, did you have something? I'm ignoring you. I think I am.
Oh, yeah, no, I
Sorry.
just,
Sorry.
you know.
I have a tendency to. I gotta come back.
That's all right,
Yeah.
we had talked about the database and, tracking,
Yeah.
street by street where the trees are, so we could explicitly, we made that request to track, which areas, which streets or what areas of towns had less canopy than others and, had a higher need. So we specifically talked about that with the database, so I know several people have raised that, but that was,
Since the database doesn't mention canopy.
right, it just measures just trees, but, and we all know there's some streets you drive down, literally there's one street in the entire block, one tree in the entire block. And then there's other streets, and there's literally every house has a tree in front of it, so, it depends. But, it is, we need to understand, and I think Chris has made this clear, and we all know this from our specific personal experiences, if the residents don't want a tree, we'll spend the money to plant a tree, and I will guarantee you that within a year, the tree will be gone. Because people, it's just, they're either, there's dozens of situations where you can do it, because if people don't want it, the tree will be dead. And, at some point, we can't, throw good money after bad, planting trees where we know they're gonna be dead. And, if we wanna be successful, we have to plant trees in a place where they're gonna thrive, and that means the abutter has to take some interest in it. So, and the reality is, particularly in some parts of town, the roads are very narrow, there's no parking, they're, almost exclusively renters, who have no interest in maintaining property values, and it's just, You know, it's just sort of the nature of the beast, you know, and if we could find one person on the street who wants it, that's great, but, you know, we can't really force people to take it. And that's the reality, and we need to accept
You
that and
penalize
understand.
the rest of the street. You just say if one person wants it,
Well, if one person
But
wants,
then
right, so that one person
we're
get a
not
tree in
getting
front
to
of their
the root of
house.
the problem.
If there's absentee, if most of the street is absentee landlords and there's renters that every year somebody new's moving in and they're parking cars on the tree roots and they're bumping it in the winter, you know, it becomes a problem. And at some point, you know, I would rather, we have a good plan here with some clear objectives. We want to increase the number of trees we plant. And the biggest, you know, yes, we want to focus on areas where there's the greatest need. But if we can't find people on those areas, streets with the greatest need that will be willing to take a tree, we need to move on to a different street. And, you know, maybe over time with the education and as part of the street, the road construction program where we repave a street and we put in curbs and which provides some additional protection, we can put in 4-foot by 4-foot tree planting pits, then it becomes more advantageous. But you know, a street with no curbs, with paved over planting strips, you know, it's almost
I just
a losing battle.
Sorry, Libby, yes.
There's one really nice success story right now, right over in my neighborhood. Edenfield was kind of a sad story, but Edgecliff is wonderful. The Edgecliff Woodley Westland neighborhood. It began in Chris's absence, but he really carried it to fruition beautifully, where it was very carefully designed with 8-foot long, occasional 8-foot long, with 3-4 foot wide planting pits. And there is one place that has kind of a stormwater substructure underground. But the trees that were put in, the neighbors wanted trees. Some of the neighbors wanted, not all of them, but some of the neighbors wanted trees. The trees were put in very carefully under Chris's close supervision. They look beautiful. There are a couple of bump outs over there that talk about, you know, changing people's attitudes. In the beginning, one of those bump outs, it's this thing to slow down traffic, and people were just driving over it. We were really concerned about the fact that they were just destroying this, like driving up on the side across the dirt. But now that it's planted, we're all used to it. People lived in the neighborhood for years and just said, "What is this? This is in my way." But now it's beautiful. It's got gorgeous trees. It's got plantings. It's really, really nice. And East Watertown is one of the neighborhoods that really is really barren overall. But this particular road reconstruction is a beautiful forward step, and it represents that the neighbors are changing their attitudes too, because people wanted trees, and now people who live there can see how beautiful it is with these new trees. Beautiful specimens of new trees. So I think the other thing I think we also need to continue to move forward with is making it so that the trees that we plant can live, can actually thrive where they're put. Because a lot of people, I've read about this in other cities, a lot of people in neighborhoods that have trees don't want trees because they've seen trees go in and die. They've seen trees go in into their neighborhoods and be neglected, and just basically whizzing away and just turn into really ugly thing in their neighborhood. If we do what's being done now in terms of making sure that trees are watered when they go in, if we do much more than Watertown's doing now in terms of making sure there's structural soil under the sidewalks near trees, so the trees can actually spread out root structures and get to the soil on the other side of the sidewalk. These kinds of things will ensure that when trees go into a neighborhood, people see that they are a real beautiful thing that's happening to them. And
Do we have a watering truck?
we do.
We do now?
We have had one, just nobody was using it. Bob Dorico was using it for watering plants
Okay,
in the parks. Now I'm borrowing that. when he's
that's
out.
great. Because I was always told we didn't have one, so that's good to hear.
Sorry, we'll go Caroline and then Michelle.
So I was just wondering if there's any effort, especially, I guess, with your government, is to contact the owners of those plans for
that's the other, you know, sort of barrier that big organizations have.
That's a really interesting point about new homeowners coming in and giving them the policy. Because in my mind, I think you're right that like when someone buys a new home, they'll send the residential exemption application. So, but that's what the assessors do all day. They just track homes and wait and look at the sales literally all day. So, yeah, I don't know how that information would get to Chris.
Does it normally go out in like the spring newsletter or summer newsletter? Because I know
I say if that'd be the thing. It could just be part of it. We'll go on
I don't know if
announcements.
it normally has ever done that, but I could look into doing it.
Yeah,
that's just my.
That could be
I'm trying
public-
to think where I found out
part of
about
the
it in
education.
the first place.
Just recently.
yeah.
But to Caroline's point, we don't have an easy way to do that, to request.
So could we just put an online? Have
If we had something online, it might, it's more likely to, like, and I think,
Yeah.
I don't think my kids are special, I think that's probably a generational thing. They're used to going online.
Sorry, I think Vinny had a
So,
comment.
so that's an interesting thing. So
Yeah.
the assessor's office does track property transfers.
Yeah.
And they do mail out, if it's an owner occupied property, they do mail out the residential exemption
Yep.
form to those new homeowners. Does it make sense that as part of that form that they would have a letter about requesting a tree planting stuck in
Yeah.
with that residential exemption application?
well, that application only goes out what in August.
They do it once a year.
Yeah, once a year. I think it goes in July.
Because it
July
has
1.
to go,
Yeah.
it goes to the January 1st transfer. But again, you know, you're a new homeowner, you get the letter say, you know, you're eligible for this tax exemption if you fill out this form and send it back to us, you know.
Well,
you
I'm
know,
trying to get away from forms, to tell you the truth, because it's just me, so I've got a stack right now of requests and forms. So
I agree.
what me and Matt Schuman have done, our town engineer, we put together a brochure working with,
Oh, nice.
Worsley Witten for tree planting and care. And on here, it gives my email address, and it says, if you want a new tree, put in the subject heading, new tree planting request.
Yeah.
And that goes right to a box that I have, and you just put your name, your address, your phone number, and you want a new tree. And then I come out there and I look at the site. So we're just rolling these things out now.
That could be really
We
good.
have one for tree planting and care, we also have one for discussing about the planting strip. And if you've got a planting strip on your front of your house that's been paved over, you can contact the highway supervisor. This crew can go out and scoop up all the asphalt, put down some loam and seed. Then you go to the tree planting care and you can get a new tree from me. So, you know, we're trying to reach people. Now, maybe this is something that we should be putting in that.
So
Yeah,
if I could just, I don't,
Yeah.
so,
The timing.
we've got the document created.
Yeah.
Could we maybe, you know, talk to request the assessor and say, can you just, every time you send out these residential exemption letters, stick one of these in the envelope with it? I mean,
Do they email new owners?
No, they-
That
they
we
don't
don't
send
have
it,
to
mail.
they mail it
print?
because they have no idea what people.
Yeah.
Quick look at this one.
Oh, yeah, it's
I've-
really cool.
I've-
Yeah,
I've seen that before. So, you know, it has to go by mail to the property owner of record on the tax record, so
Yeah.
that's how they.
Right, but I mean, it seems like we should be also moving towards electronic as
Yeah,
we
I mean,
can.
if this is in PDF form, I mean,
Yeah.
we all have email lists, right?
Yep. Well, I'm just saying, it's the sweet spot is the
Yeah.
new homeowner
Yeah.
who's
Right.
excited about,
Yeah.
they just bought a new house and can make the what can I do to make my house nicer? You know, I mean,
That's true.
that is, in my mind, that
That's a really good
seems
idea,
to be,
Caroline.
you catch people right at the critical point. You know,
They're still optimistic.
and they're still, before they become cynical.
I have to water?
So, no, I actually think, and you know, and since we're actually required to mail them something already, maybe just putting in a
Yeah.
one-page thing in the same envelope, you know, it's not really gonna cost the town any extra money, other than, you know, that somebody in the assessor's office sticking a second piece of paper in with the application,
Yeah.
so, I don't know, it's a
No,
thought.
I
you're
think that's
doing-
worth
I haven't
following up
seen
with
this,
this-
but-
the assessing office.
It's right, it was just
Yeah.
coming out, me and Matt.
So-
We're just
I'm
looking
sorry,
at that.
just 2 seconds. While we resolve this, yeah.
So anyway, I mean,
Yeah.
is that something we would want to
Yeah,
ask the administration to consider?
yeah.
Is, Vinnie, do you think there's any, the assessor's office would have any problem with publishing
it's all public records.
Yeah, those are all.
I mean,
Well, we
it's,
don't-
it's actually
They don't
published,
make, they
it's
don't make
published in
that
the newspaper,
public.
it's published in the Watertown Tab every week, you know,
Yeah, but the,
who buys.
Yeah, because then you can just go on Mass Land Records and search the property.
I mean, you could, I mean, that's a public
no,
record.
it's
Yeah.
not, but it's not that easy if you're trying to get a full,
Yeah, if you wanna get a full
list of-
like, what
you have to have the right spelling
new
and,
homeowners in the last 3 months.
Yeah, I guess.
They have that,
I don't know.
they have it.
Is
the assessors would.
Assessor has it.
receipt
I
of
brought that up
the
at the budget hearing about
exemption, is that
assessors because I'd like more frequent updates,
No, that's
just
public
knowing
record,
who
you
lives
have to
there.
be the,
And they said they have it
you go in
internally,
the assessor's database.
they just don't regularly give it
Yeah.
to council, so I think there's some discussion about releasing that, even though it's public record. Because otherwise, the public database is just like once a year and it's almost 2 years old because it has to be certified.
Awfully helpful with that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe we should make a request.
I
to-
think part of the problem is, anybody who's buys a house, they immediately get inundated with junk mail from people
Yes.
trying to sell them any and everything.
a lot of insurance.
because that is public record and businesses.
Yeah, but if it's from the
Yeah.
town, I like the idea. I'm just wondering about the
this-
right,
timing,
but
how
the-
this is laid out with a budget.
But if it
and-
came, I think the odds of somebody actually opening the envelope and reading it are gonna be better.
If,
when it's
if the
done-
return address is the tax assessor.
The assessor's office.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
so let's, can we ask, does the committee wanna
But-
just
I think that's a
ask
great
I
that?
think it's a really good idea.
But also, again, I think there's some confusion about this public or private. I mean, are we saying that the town is going to prune trees that are not public trees?
No,
No.
Okay,
we can't.
so
But
But by
Some-
definition, Chris, if it's within 20 feet of the roadway, and you planted it, it's a public tree, right?
For 1 year.
Only for 1 year.
Yeah, just until the warranty runs out.
And that, because then,
so-
because then it actually becomes their property.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it becomes their property, and that's the agreement when you plant a tree on it.
right, and so,
Sadly,
there's
about
some,
10 years ago, I planted a beautiful tree in a part of town on a private property. The owner really loved it, and then the owner passed away, the new owner.
Right. and sometimes,
I know of other communities that actually have, you gotta get that tree on like deed or some type of perpetual type of thing that this tree has to stay, there's been an agreement in place, previous owner. I don't know if Watertown's considering that at this time, but if you do,
So-
I can find out the other communities that have it, get that one.
Libby would love that language. I'll tell you right now.
well, yeah, I mean, there's city ordinances, you can have, like I say, a certain lot, you have to get permission, you cannot cut down trees, which is again why I think about ceding public space, that there's penalties, just like with anything else, until helping the attitudes change. I totally understand that it's frustrating to plant and say, someone says, oh, I don't want that, and they're actively going out there, but I don't think the whole street should suffer because of a homeowner, and it's like, wow, this place could have 4 trees and we can't even get one, and it's the one place on the street that doesn't have wires. So I would love it if there was, the one thing about back of the sidewalk program, it almost sounds like, all trees are a problem for the sidewalk and the route crowds the sidewalk. If some of the language explain, we can work with you on the size of the tree, or, which it sounds like you're doing more in this language, but, again, this one sentence doesn't make sense. Tracking of new plantings and the effect on town canopy levels.
Which sentence?
The
There's two
first
sentences.
sentence doesn't make
Or
sense to me. I don't know.
Forest
what else.
Division will track how the number of trees planted by the division and by non-municipal organizations or persons affect the overall tree canopy levels.
well, you need to have the levels to.
But-
Yeah, we're gonna add that language.
in there.
Yeah, we're gonna add that language in there.
Right,
Yeah.
So we're basically saying, once we add the levels in, we can see whether any trees are changed the canopy.
We'll track how the number of trees planted by the division and by non-municipal organizations and persons, is what you're saying, affect, meaning affect, AFFECT,
Right.
the overall town canopy levels.
So once again, you do need to distinguish between canopy
Yeah,
and numbers of trees.
What is the difference? What do you?
So canopy is if you're in a satellite and looking looking down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all that green
Yeah.
grass canopy.
Right.
Okay, that you can assess using satellite images.
Okay,
But when you're talking about individual trees, there are little trees,
oh, I see what you're saying.
trees, there are
Trees
trees
that don't,
Yeah.
that don't add to the canopy
Yeah,
because they're
that's-
too small,
yeah,
or is
And
that?
that's why canopies like spread out. Like you have a tree that's like one tree, but it spreads out ridiculous amounts. It's a way bigger canopy. Yeah, so that's why it's separated as a canopy piece. So
Could I suggest another addition to this?
real quick, let's see if we can get a referral on this particular issue. If
So,
anyone-
Suggestion that we add, a second suggestion, we add another section, that includes reports on outreach efforts that are done, have been done in the last year, and the results of those efforts.
Can we
So-
just add that to the annual update, or?
Well, wherever you want it.
Yeah,
I mean,
I guess I would consider that for the very last section,
Yeah.
for the update on pruning related initiatives. So the board of supervisors will update the community on any other initiatives.
So let's make it clear.
Yeah,
That there will be a report on outreach efforts
Including outreach efforts.
and the results of those efforts.
Outreach efforts.
I guess I would ask before, I would wanna defer to Chris too, I mean,
Yeah,
What do you mean by outreach efforts?
Well, if there's no,
How many people I asked, they want a tree during the year?
well, let's say, one of the outreach effort would be, for example, if we had the idea came here, but if you had another idea, but the idea of getting the brochure, that's an outreach effort. Creating the brochure is an
Yeah.
outreach effort.
Or like working with teens for
Distributing the
trees.
brochure at the library or at the senior center is an outreach effort.
Okay,
Getting the brochure in the assessor's mailing is an outreach effort. So you can create outreach efforts. And some years you may not have any new ones, right? But the idea is that it's integral. Outreach effort, you call it education. So outreach/education is integral to making this goal happen. You are not gonna get to 250 trees unless we convince more people to use that strip, right? So outreach efforts and education are key to the goal. Unless we're gonna tell people, "Ooh, we're gonna plant trees all over you, whether you like it or not." But we're not doing that, so.
I guess I would just wanna be careful about the wording, because I don't wanna impose additional duties on Chris that he might not have the time.
for instance, this year,
Should be
you know, we had
having
trees
it
and
anyway.
climate change, which.
Tracking it anyway.
That's an outreach.
Yeah, I'll
major
say that,
outreach
yeah.
effort.
15 requests that day.
Yep.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
So, and then if the brochure lines up more folks, so.
Yep.
You know, there are efforts, for
Right.
sure.
Yeah.
And so.
So quantifying those efforts and seeing how they result of those, I think would be helpful.
But the report will also, how
yeah.
are you tracking the number of requests, and you say constantly evolving database? What are we using?
Right now, Excel. I have an Excel database for the year, calendar year. People call in, they call into the staff up front. They get me that information, either email it to me or put it on a note. I keep it in that Excel database, and then I take that database and I go out into the streets and I determine whether or not a tree is suitable for that location. If it's not, I explain to the resident why I can't plant a tree for you. If it is, I determine what kind of tree I'm gonna be planting in that location. And then I take that list and move it over to basically a list that I send off to my vendor. And the vendor takes that list, plants all the trees, and we move on to the next year.
So you're tracking when you get the request, when you respond, when it's
Not so much
planted?
when I respond, I don't say like,
But-
I responded on July 10th. I just say that, okay, I've got this request. The stump is gone, site has been marked by DPW for water and sewer and gas, and then the tree is planted.
I understand that, I think that's great, but I think for long-term, in order to get any metrics on whether you need more staff or how long it takes from request to get trees planted, how many pruned, when are the health checks done? I, am concerned if it's, in the long run, if it's just Excel, that is a lot of manual input, and I don't know how this potentially interfaces with any satellite data, or we still don't have the data from trees of the software that you guys are using on that, right?
The open tree map software that the team.
So like we'd actually have performance metrics of forestry. I mean, I really see your area growing, right? But in the budget request, we'd have to,
Yeah.
would think we'd have to back that up.
I guess I could see a situation, again, if it's like wildly successful, where Chris comes back and says, hey, I can't do this Excel thing anymore. Like, it's taking all my time just to track them. You guys need to give me money to get a program.
Okay, just, we have order systems now, right? I guess maybe we need to hear from DPW as far as service order requests, whether it's People GIS or C-Click Fix, or I don't know how many systems we have going for.
Sure, we don't need to discuss that tonight, though. We just need to be sure that they're being tracked and we can use those numbers in an efficient way. That's the goal for tonight.
Well,
we wanna regulate
but
that
I'd like
further,
it on the
it's really-
record, because it's part of our objectives, and we want to be able to measure our success,
Great.
right?
We don't need to
That-
micromanage tonight what
I'm not
system he's
micromanaging,
gonna
Ken. If I
use,
could finish what I'm saying, I would really appreciate it.
by all means.
That I think this is a really great start, and I don't want us to end up in saying, gee, last year or 2 years ago, why didn't we think of that then? I mean, this day and age, it's pretty straightforward with setting out the goals, the time frame, the budget, and then we want to be able to measure the performance and have him be able to advocate for the resources that he wants or needs as this program we all hope grows, right?
I guess the
That's
question
what
for
I'm
Chris
saying.
would be, are you aware of any software that does what Lisa is suggesting? And if you have any experience with it, and if so, do they work? And if not?
Or at this stage, is it necessary?
I'm aware of what some other communities are doing with bigger staff, but I just accepted this role in September, so I'm not really advocating for new staff just yet. Every day, like I said at the beginning, it's changing daily. I'm doing different things today that I wasn't doing. So, every day is a learning experience, and but I'm very involved with the Mass Street Workers Association, where I'm getting a lot of my information from, going to a lot of seminars, a lot of courses, learning a lot of things that other guys are doing in communities that have been doing this for maybe even a little bit longer than Watertown has been doing. So I'll definitely be bringing back information in January with maybe this Excel isn't working as best we can. I know that things do get lost in cracks. There are definitely cracks that I need to fill. So I'll be bringing back information.
No pun intended there as well. No pun intended. Yeah.
A lot of things
So
today.
I'm gonna ask if it's okay, Benny, will you make a motion on Caroline's suggestion? So we can just get that taken care of before we move on to the next issue. Also, Michelle's been extremely patient in having me, so I'm gonna get this recommendation, see if we can get a motion on that issue and then turn it over. So that's okay, so we can resolve that piece.
Okay, so the motion would be to ask the administration to investigate adding the new tree planting flyer to the tax bills that are mailed to new homeowners for the residential exemption.
Well, it's not the tax bill that goes to them, right?
Not the tax bill, the application.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So moved.
Well, I mean,
Oh, you made a second. Is there a second?
Well, yeah.
you're the chair, who's making a
Is
second?
there a
Review
second?
material. Second.
All in favor? Oh, sorry. Any further comments on that?
Well, I was just gonna say, it sounds a little specific. The motion's probably fine, but it's just whatever materials you guys are coming up with that's
Yeah.
gonna be.
Whether we call it fly, it's gonna, yeah.
Well, the new tree flyer, whatever that is, we
Right.
don't need
They're
to.
gonna get it, yeah.
That's what I'm saying, we don't need to specify.
So I haven't taken a close look at those two documents except to see that they're beautiful.
Yeah.
One of them is about, reclaiming the planting strip and the other is about tree planting. I think they're both valuable to share, but that's making for a pretty fat envelope.
Yeah, so this is just, see what assessors say. I bet you they're not gonna wanna do it, just throwing it out there, but this is the first step, so maybe they say we can't do it for this reason or that, we say, okay, that's fine, maybe then we work on something different, this is just kinda step one, yeah. In my mind, they're not gonna wanna do it, which is fair.
Well,
So we're saying investigate
we're gonna ask them,
whether it's-
Yeah, to investigate,
investigate
yeah.
the feasibility of adding that, and let them come back and say either yes.
Yes, or,
Yes, we can add this one page trifold into the envelope, at no additional cost, or no, we're gonna have to hire a second person to do it
Yeah.
because it's gonna be such a burden, so, I mean, all we can do is ask, and then we'll see what the answer is, and then we'll
and
take
go
it
from there, yeah.
So this is really interesting to Trees for Watertown Do you have any sense of a timescale of when you might get an answer from the assessor's office?
We don't even know when this is gonna go in front of council. So,
This report,
August.
will probably be,
Earliest.
the earliest would be the August council
yeah,
meeting.
and the full council would have to approve and then go from there. And I would assume within a few weeks after that. But just all depends.
Can I just verify too, because it seemed like your bids went out earlier than we thought as far as trees, maybe I'm wrong, when you said January to February. Again, I know this is, we're considering this kind of a draft that we're just using as guidelines tonight as far as these materials. Is January to February timeline as far as it says in here on the annual updates makes sense where you're, come back with data?
Real
Or
quick,
would you rather have it in December?
Before we adjust that, we should just vote on this.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Sorry, yes, and
I mean, Ken, it sounds like, maybe you've already have discussions, but
yes, yeah,
so, the
Yeah.
timeframe.
time frame works.
The hardest part for that time frame is if you catch me on a day after I plowed the night before.
Yeah, right, depending on weather, and I'm just thinking
Yeah.
like the overall, I mean, you're more familiar thinking of the overall budget schedule. This ties into request for the budget and.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. Okay, Michelle, I'm so sorry. You've been very gracious in bringing up your point. Thanks for waiting for us to dissect that whole issue before.
And it's
Yes.
a different topic anyway, so
Perfect.
that's fine. So I was looking at the Watertown's tree planting program, and it only discusses requests and nothing else. I was wondering why there's no inclusion of other types of tree planting other than requests. Like, I guess outreach could potentially be part of that as well, but also like, any kind of details about other types of tree planting besides requests.
I think, and I don't want to speak for Chris, but I think this is just so that it's for like a resident to look at it. Like, of course, I'm sure all the other plantings that are happening in town on public property, that wouldn't be included in here only because this is more to inform someone who wants a tree how to get one.
Oh, okay, well,
Yeah.
just for me, the title kind of is all encompassing.
Fair point.
Program,
Very fair point,
which would
absolutely.
include requests and whatever other
Yeah.
efforts made by Chris.
Fair point.
I mean, is there a possibility that you can come up with a document that describes other types of tree planting programs? I mean, besides requests,
Are they more per
For
diem?
Watertown, you mean?
like what Watertown does, like what is their tree
Well,
planting
We have
program?
one, we
like,
talked,
plan.
we discussed, there isn't one.
Like as we do projects,
The per diem.
the other tree plantings we do.
There's no defined planning, like,
No, there's no like road reconstruction equivalent plan of like, hey, we're gonna do,
yeah.
Evans Street
Well,
next year.
Well, that's actually not true. Like when we do projects like park reconstruction stuff, tree plantings is an inherent part of that. So that is
Yeah, of course.
actually, that is like a road project, when we're redoing Arsenal Park, or we're redoing Victory Field, or we're redoing Casey Field,
Always part
or,
of it.
the landscaping and tree planting is part of that and is built into the cost of that capital project. But that's separate. This is really sort of designed for like street trees.
Yeah.
Park trees are not street trees. They're not public shade trees. They're covered under a different section of the law. So
we
it's.
call it public
So,
trees.
so we certainly, when we're doing other town capital projects, planting of trees is part of that process.
Well-
Michelle raises a really, good point, which is the title of this, maybe could be a little bit.
Yeah. You put in parentheses, street trees. Sorry,
The
yeah.
title just came because of the trees and climate change. People came to me and said, how can I request a tree?
Yeah.
What is your program for requesting a tree?
Right.
So it would be tree planting request program.
Yeah, yeah.
But I can also add that
Boom.
as part of the road reconstruction project, the road total reconstruction section.
Oh,
of these neighborhoods,
yeah, it's all,
Those trees are now included in that
Yes.
that project.
exactly.
I'm not gonna say that it's the best, program yet, because now I'm dealing with a contractor that's a road contractor who hires a subcontractor,
Yeah.
who hires another subcontractor that gets the trees.
Yeah.
So I'm dealing with three different entities, where in my tree requested program, I'm dealing with one vendor.
Yeah.
That you've
and-
chosen.
Yeah,
Yeah, that I've chosen, and there are some some small mistakes that took place this year in Libby's neighborhood, as well as a couple of other streets that were part of that capital project, Priest Street, Everett. So there were some different things that I ran up against, and we're talking about that within the DPW now. See if we can kind of clear up those problems going forward.
Is there a way to require them to use your tree vendor?
Maybe, but since they did bid on a contract, and it says in there that you bring in your own, but that has to be approved by the tree warden, there's some fuzzy areas there that I've got to help clear up, based on mistakes that happened this season.
Yeah, sorry, Lisa.
Just two things. I was wondering about if somebody wanted to, one incentive is if you wanted to dedicate a tree. I don't know if you want to say anything about the possibility of doing that. And then the other question was, I think it's been $95 for quite a while. Do you just feel like that number is, for a donation, is, you're happy keeping it at 95, or should it be 125? I don't know. It's up to, you know.
Well, I can say for the better part of the first 12 years that I worked here,
Yeah.
I got about 20% back in those $95 donations. So if I planted 100 trees, about 20 people would send in that. I thought that was pretty generous. Some people would send in just $25 and just say, well, thank you, card. Thanks a lot. You know, I don't know. It's kind of tough for me to say the only reason you're getting trees is because you're going to give me $125. We have a program. The council's been very generous, and the manager's been working with you to put together this program. We can afford to plant trees.
Okay,
I
that's,
don't really want to pressure people to say, you know,
That's fine,
Do you use it all?
What?
Do you use all the money you set aside for planting?
Yeah.
So are you running out each year?
No, well, especially not this year because planting was very difficult this spring. It was so wet.
Mhm.
I was very late getting a contractor. I had to put those documents at the bid. There was no planting that took place last year, so it was based off of requests from
Last year.
previous year. So this year, so I have money left over. I've already been working with the auditor and we moved that into next year.
Just wanted to add two things that I've read recently. That this have nothing to do with this proposal, though it supports this proposal. I read recently where there's a study that's been done where trees help reduce crime. That the more trees you have in a neighborhood, the less crime there was. Now I'm sure there are other variables that were not held constant, maybe there were. And then recently I read where that we could do a major dent into climate change if we planted over, I think it was 1 billion trees. We would have a major impact on climate change, but we'd have to plant 1 billion trees. Just a lot of trees.
250 billion.
Million.
I get rid of it.
But did you want to go through each of these?
No, so I think, I mean, so in my mind,
Yeah, what's your-
if it's okay with you guys, the three, it seems like the committee has consensus on three changes. One would be the title of the Watertown Tree Planting Program to read Watertown Tree Planting Request Program. The second one would be the recommendations of Councilor Palumba in the section on tree canopy levels to add an update about existing levels and identifying locations where canopy is lacking. And then the recommendation for the last section, which would include, have language that says including any outreach efforts and the results of those efforts. So I guess, should we, if.
So I would make a
Yeah.
motion that, that this committee concurs with these proposed objectives, program and guidelines with these three suggested changes.
Is there a second?
Second.
And,
Discuss.
yeah.
I don't know, I mean, do you think they're adequate saying long-term objectives? These really seem more like short-term, because you said we're gonna evaluate, see how it goes on the numbers, and, you know, we're gonna get data from the Teens for Trees. I mean, is it
I
a
could,
2-year, 5-year?
yeah, I could
thing?
care less.
Short-term
I could care
objectives?
less whether we call it long or short term or just take it out, yeah.
Well, no, I mean, I'm asking because a lot of things came up, so
Yeah.
We're changing the title of the,
Completely impartial. I think just so we don't have this conversation, I'd be willing to take out the term long term.
Okay, and just say the Watertown's tree program annual objectives.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So four things, so with the
Yeah.
four
Four suggestions. Okay.
So who seconded that?
Anthony.
Okay.
Okay. So the motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it. I think with that, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second?
second,
All in favor?
Aye.
aye.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it.
I do want to say my neighbor, I'm on Arden Road, and my neighbor right across the street just had two trees